Tuesday, March 20th, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I'm going to look at the markets as usual this morning, and I want to talk about Russia, how it's gone from communism to economic freedom. And that's my opinion, the economic freedom. And you could argue with me, and please leave comments below. And if you're Russian, let me know what you think about my ideas. And the reason I'm going to talk about that is that in the West, there's so much vilification of Russia and President Putin that a lot of people think it's because the West and the globalists want to provoke a war, a kinetic war with Russia. But maybe it's got nothing to do with that. Maybe it's got something to do with the way the Russians are running their economy. We're always told that Russia under Putin is a dictatorship. They have no democracy. We have people who have NGOs like George Soros with an open society. And you think, oh, it's not an open society. It's not free. But I would argue that I think I can make a good argument that Russia is just as free economically as the West, and if not more. So before I go into that, though, let's have a look at what we're doing. Of course, yesterday was not a great day for the equity market in the U.S. The Dow finished down 335 points, 1.35%. The S&P finished down 1.42% or 39 points. And the NASDAQ led the way. It finished down 138 points or 1.84%. So not a great day. Quickly perusing or looking at the Dow chart since, the correction that started at the end of the tail end of January. We had the low at the 9th of February. We've had a consolidation. And it looks like we could be resuming the leg down. We'll have to see over the next few days. And today and tomorrow will be important, of course, because we're going to have the FOMC meeting, the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee. They will, a rate hike tomorrow is priced in completely. And tomorrow as well, they'll have the press conference after the meeting, and the Fed Chairman Powell will come out with the summary of economic projections, and that's what the market is going to focus on, whether the Federal Reserve is looking to raise rates 4 or 3 times, and that's what the market will react to. What's happening this morning then? Well, it's been fairly quiet. It is quite early. It's 6:40 a.m. London. Spot gold is 1360.80, basically unchanged. The high's been 1360.80. I think I said 1660, but gold is 1360.80, unchanged. The range has been 1314.5 to 1318.5. Very narrow range. Gold yesterday rallied quite well later on in the day. Silver also rebounded, but still a little bit under pressure. We're at fairly low levels considered from the recent range. We're at 1634, up 3 cents this morning. Range has been 1628 to 1637. The Dow is rebounded. Overnight, it's up 100 points, 24,708. S&P is up 0.4%. S&P is up 11 points, 0.4% as well. And the NASDAQ is up 18, up only 0.25%. Currency-wise, pound is still fairly firm. It spiked higher yesterday, and it's remained above 140. It's up 0.14% at 140.45. Sterling. Euro is up 0.1% at 123.46. And the dollar is up almost 0.25% against the yen at 106.26. The bond market, let's have a look. The 10-year yield is at 286, so still fairly elevated. So in terms of the market, yeah, tomorrow will be the key day. The Fed will make its announcement at 2 p.m. New York time or 6 p.m. London, and after that they'll have the press conference with all the forecasts and the questions as well from the press. So from communism to economic freedom, I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, and of course the Cold War was the major thing back then. The bipolar world, the mutual assured destruction, the free world against the communist world. The Soviet Union was the leader of the communist world, and the U.S. the leader of the free world, and the Russians were under the Soviet system. Don't forget, there were other socialist republics, but Russians were dominant, of course. And for over 70 years, the Soviet Union and Russia were under this communist dictatorship where an elite ran the economy. There was no private property, no freedom. I even remember back in the 80s, there was an old joke that said, that's sad because there was an advert, I think, American Express, don't leave home without it. And the joke was that the Russian Express card was don't leave home, because for a lot of young people that don't know, Russians couldn't travel very easily abroad. The only time they would probably leave Russia is if they went to the Olympics outside the Soviet Union or a sports event and they defected. That's the only way they could get out. So it was a completely closed society, and not only in the Soviet Union and Russia, but other Eastern European countries. And then out of the blue, the Soviet Union imploded on its own. The system just didn't cope anymore and collapsed in 1991. I'm not going to go through it. This is brief because it's just an idea that I've had. So from what I've read and listened to people say, of course, after this collapse in 1991, there's a huge power vacuum, a lot of upheaval. The older generations that were used to having the state look after them, they were vulnerable. There were a lot, even the Russian population declined. Of course, the Soviet Union broke up. Russia, there was no more Soviet Union, and Russia went back to its old borders. Baltic countries became independent, and other countries, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, loads of other countries we never heard about became countries. And it culminated with the Russian financial crisis in 1998. There was a default. Russia went bankrupt. And from what I read as well, and from what I learned, a lot of the oligarchs back then, the people that were clever enough to exploit the system, the disorder, the instability, they took over huge state assets, former Soviet state assets, like factories, mines, land, and they basically raped the country, and they were able to siphon off all the capital and all the money and put it abroad. And I would say London was one of the places where they were able to do that. And those were the oligarchs. And then came a guy called Putin, and he cleaned up house, I guess. And nowadays, he's vilified. And I'm not saying Russia's perfect, but if you look at the West, they still call rich businessmen or businesswomen in Russia oligarchs nowadays. They say they're corrupt. Maybe, and they could be right, but is every Russian business person corrupt? Is every Russian business person related, close to Putin or against Putin? And the thing about that is that if you look at us in the West, we had in '08 the great financial crisis. The banksters, the international banks, investment banks, they brought the whole system down, and they were saved by the government. Goldman Sachs, Lehman wasn't saved, of course, but Bear Stearns was saved. You had the bailout HARP. Warren Buffett put $5 billion into Goldman Sachs because he knew ahead that from his cronies and insiders in government that they were going to bail everything out, and he made a killing. So why don't we call the bankers and the people who benefited from the bailout oligarchs? Well, Steve Mnuchin, who's ex-Goldman Sachs, he got involved after the crisis, and he bought one of the failed subprime lenders, I think, or one of the, and he made a killing as well. And now he's in the Trump government. He's an oligarch, you could say. So yeah, that's the way the West demonizes Russia. But the thing that I said earlier in the video, that I think the West vilifies Russia because what they're doing economically. When the mainstream media or fake media, they always talk about how the West is the rich part of the world. We're free and democratic. But when you look at taxation and debt, I think you'll find this very interesting. And I got this from Statista.com. And you can check all this. I'm not making this up. And I haven't got it on a chart on the video because I don't want to. This is not, it's a quicker video. I don't have that much time to go through it. But according to Statista, it says here, national debt of important industrial and emerging countries in 2017 in relation to gross domestic product, or GDP. So Japan, 240% of GDP. United States, 108% of GDP. France, 96.8% of GDP. United Kingdom, 89.48%. And I would argue that that's a much bigger number because the UK keeps a lot of debt off its books, debt that it used to save the banks. So I would say that's even more. And then you go down to China, 47.6. Yeah, that's lower. That's lower than the West, lower than the US, of course, national debt. But then you go down to Russia, and this is truly amazing. Well, not amazing, but 17.35%, and that's 17, not 70. So the Russian national debt is 17.35% of GDP. Who's free economically, more free economically as a nation? Russia or the United States? Russia or Japan? Russia with 17.35% of national debt. United States with 108.14%. And that's only the national debt in the US. We're not talking about all the unfunded liabilities that the US has. That's even bigger. I'm not too sure about the Russian unfunded liabilities, but they might have some as well. But still, look at, that's a huge difference. And then you look at taxation, and I always heard that the income tax in Russia was a flat rate of 13%, and I wasn't too sure about that, but I did check it out on Wikipedia, and all I did is Google taxation in Russia, and I had all the information. Personal income tax is levied individually at 13%. So there you go, 13%. Of course, there are other taxes. They tax oil a lot. They have a lot of revenues. But why not? It's a national treasure. And what are the, what are the US and UK and European tax rates? They're, the middle to top rates are like anywhere from like 20 to 25% up to almost 40%. And it's even worse in in Western Europe, like in France and Germany, in Italy. Taxation is a huge burden. So here we have, that's what I think. I think the West is scared that, and the globalists, that Russia is going back to what maybe America used to be before the Federal Reserve was formed. There was no income tax before the Federal Reserve was created. They reinstated the income tax, I think, around the same time with the 16th Amendment. And at the time, it was only 7% and for very rich people. So what I'm trying to say here, what if this is what it's all about? They want to put the spotlight on Russia in the defense way, in the threat way, because they want to keep the spotlight out of how well they've done with their economy and how they've come back from collapse only 20 years ago, and how they have very little debt, how people pay very little tax. Of course, there are other taxes. I think, VAT, there's VAT on imports, but it's not that much higher than the European VAT taxes. So there you go. Is that why, there's so much about Russia these days? So much blaming on Putin and Russia? Is it because the West wants to keep the spotlight away from the fact that the Russian economy is actually relatively free compared to the Western economies? I mean, this is up to you to make up your mind. Do your own research as well. Like me, I've just brought up the idea. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on steemit.com and on Twitter. I'll talk to you later.